thank you all for joining this meeting. I'm grateful to be here to speak to you on behalf of the IDF. And I'm, especially in these times, even more grateful for your friendship and support from a distance, from near and from far. It is, I would say this, it is not taken for granted. And I'd probably say that we don't say thank you enough. As Joe rightly pointed out, I retired from the military. I retired from the military in 2017. I did not intend on ever wearing the uniform and speaking on behalf of the IDF again. But desperate times, and on the 7th of October, I was lying in my bed in the early hours of the holiday, and my wife looked at me as the siren sounded, and we went down to the shelter, took cover with my 12-year-old. And when we came up, I saw the images of Hamas terrorists coming over the fence on their paragliders. My wife looked at me, Liat, she looked at me and she said, Peter, they're coming for us too. And we live an hour away from the border with Gaza. I think this is a very, very raw, real feeling, real sense that every Israeli has. Of course, the next thing I did was send the IDF spokesperson's unit, the international spokesperson who's in charge of the international branch today. I sent him a message and said, I'm here if you need me. He said, we're holding back on you for when it really gets serious. And on the 9th of October, he called me in for service, and I've been in reserve duty ever since. So in our pre-communication, I've been asked to actually talk a bit about the border with Lebanon, and I will try and illustrate exactly what we're seeing over the last 3 months with regard to our confrontation, our war with Hamas, but how it is actually being exploited by Hezbollah, and if this is helpful, just to share, and perhaps I can give you some questions afterwards. So, Joe, you can see the slide. Just making sure. Thank you. So, what we've seen since the outbreak of the war, and since Israel was forced into war against Hamas in Gaza, we've seen that regional players such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis from Yemen and other pro-Iranian militias operating in Syria have been directed to engage Israel. Iran has utilized their influence on these organizations and instructed them to engage Israel precisely to get, and I would say to try and divert our attention, our focus from Hamas in Gaza. Iran has invested extensively in Hamas with $100 million a year support. And so there is a clear interest that Israel's attention won't be focused, and our military capabilities will be challenged. And what we've seen since the course of the last 3 months is extensive battles, basically on the border with Lebanon. Hezbollah have conducted attempts to infiltrate the border, like the infiltrations from the 7th of October, on a small scale, but the same type of thing nevertheless. They've conducted extensive rocket and mortar fire against civilian communities. They've used anti-tank guided missiles against military locations, civilian locations, vehicles across the border area. They've conducted drone attacks against northern Israel. Yesterday, as far south as Sfat, at the military command, the Northern Command base, and also they've conducted gunfire, so machine gun and sniper fire across the border. In this slide, we can see basically that the whole frontier has become another front, which is basically under war, under fire. And in order to try and curb and control the influence of Hezbollah, what Israel has done is evacuated almost all of the people living in the radius of 5 kilometers across the border area. So about 100,000 people in the north of Israel have been evacuated from the frontier in order to get them out of harm's way. Of course, we've not been passive in this war against us from Lebanon, and I would say the extent of the attacks, as you can see in this slide, in themselves, if we weren't at war with Hamas, would be in themselves enough to go to war with Hezbollah. But Israel has maintained a defensive posture in a position that maintains our right to self-defense on one hand, but to manage the conflict on the other hand, in order to try and maintain our control, our focus in the south. The reality, of course, is a very challenging one. Yesterday, I was interviewed by the BBC that asked me about the frontier with Lebanon, and I described it as Hezbollah walking on very, very thin ice. All it takes is for rocket, missile, an attack to land in the wrong place and cause too much damage for it to spiral out of control. And Israel has been very clear, the reality that existed even on the border with Lebanon up until the 6th of October cannot return. We are currently in a process which is two-pronged. First of all, we're going to, through, I would say, the fields of diplomacy to enforce and implement the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which dictates that there should be no Hezbollah, which is beneath the blue line that you see in this slide, which is the Litani River. And Hezbollah should not be beneath this, south to this line, and there should not be any weapons to this line. The Lebanese armed forces should be in control of this area. Unfortunately, as we've seen throughout this war and throughout the extent of hundreds of rocket attacks, hundreds of drone attacks, there are plenty of weapons in this area. The concern that, and the reason we've evacuated so many people from this area is precisely because of the scenario that happened on the 7th of October in the south. This is Hezbollah's plan of invasion. And this is exactly what Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, said in 2012. If war begins with Israel, I will order the Hezbollah soldiers to conquer the Galilee. And they have, and in 2012, they published on their TV channel, on El Manar, a very, very detailed plan of action to conquer the Galil, to take control specifically over specific areas, with the use of their special forces, the Radwan force, which is a storm light infantry special force trained based on the Iranian model, in order to storm into Israel and take control of the north. So this is the scenario that we have been planning for, and we understand that they have this capability. This is the reason why so many thousands of people have been evacuated, tens of thousands of people have been evacuated from that area. And if you ask me today on the 10th of January, will there be a war with Hezbollah? I would say I don't know. I certainly hope not. I would warn the government of Lebanon to look very closely how we are destroying and dismantling the governing capabilities of Hamas in Gaza. And I would warn Iran, and I would warn Iran also to watch and see what we're doing to Hamas, how we are pursuing them and dismantling and destroying and killing their commanders on the battleground. And I would ask them, Hezbollah specifically, to be very, very wary of what they intend on pursuing, and they need to decide if they are the protectors of Lebanon, or at the beck and call of Iran and the protectors of Hamas. From our perspective, the IDF has recruited, in the aftermath of the attack on the 7th of October, a huge reserve forces. Like myself, some 300,000 reservists were called up. Indeed, due to the nature of the war in Gaza, we have released some of the reservists from the south, but our border with with Lebanon is fortified. Extensive forces now on the border there. Any infiltration attempt to be conducted by Hezbollah will be met with thousands of IDF soldiers that are prepared for that scenario. Of course, our role and our obligation is to restore safety and security on all of our borders, whether it's the south of Israel or the north of Israel. The government has instructed the IDF to dismantle and destroy Hamas in the Gaza Strip and be prepared for war in the north with Hezbollah. Indeed, our operational plans, our force preparation are ready for that eventuality, although that's not something we aspire for. We would much more rather Hezbollah retreat beyond the blue line that you see in this slide and take their weapons away from the frontier. In our counterstrikes that we've conducted in the anticipation and understanding, we have been very successful in targeting many of their capabilities in southern Lebanon, taking out many of their infrastructure from command and control capabilities, also to their strike positions that were on the immediate frontier that they utilized over the course of and built over the course of the last years across the frontier. It's not been passive, but we've been very, I would say, calculated at the extent of our strikes, taking out senior commanders when we see fit, and we see their immediate role in the attacks that are illustrated in this image. And from our perspective, the IDF needs to be prepared and ready to confront Hezbollah if that actually transpires. But again, we are currently focused in our war effort against Hamas. It's going to be a long battle down south. The government has instructed us, and we understand that 2024 will be a year of war against Hamas, and it is going to be a challenging year. So with that, I think that is my short presentation. Indeed, within the scope of my 15 minutes I was allotted. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you again, JNF, for all that you're doing. Your friendship, your support to Israel does not go missed. From here, shalom from Tel Aviv. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.